Hello, everyone, and welcome to a fireside chat with MEF. I'm Dario Betti, the CEO of MEF, the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. But today I got somebody next to me for a bit of a chat, of a longer chat about himself. And this person can use the word MEF, the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, much more than I can. He's one of the founders of this association, so we're doubly happy to have with us Andrew Bud CBE and fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, and the titles go on. So congratulations on receiving so recently being actually elected as a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering. So congratulations. But we also know you as a CEO and founder of iProve, and previously into other companies, including mBlocks and many others. Now, questions for you, Andrew, straight away, even before I ask you anything about MEF. But how does an engineer becomes a technical entrepreneur, a businessman? You know, what went there? What happened? How did you end up being who you are?
So Dario, I'm basically an engineer. Scratch me, and I'm an engineer. I always wanted to be, and for many years I am, and when no one's looking, I occasionally still do it. An engineer is fundamentally a creative problem solver. You're driven by the desire to solve interesting problems and to use your creativity to do so. And for a long time, those problems are technical. But as you build more and more, as you get more and more experience, you discover that some of the problems that have to be solved in order to make an innovation come true are not technical problems. They are business problems. And either you leave them to other people who, in my experience, often screwed them up, or you go, I don't want my and the work of my teams to be all wasted. I better solve it myself. So you go into business as a way of solving some adjacent problems, business problems, in order to make innovation happen because you've got to. And that's really the way that I got into this. I mean, iProve is now my third innovative enterprise.
But if you're a problem solver, you really like the hard problems to start with, because after the University of Cambridge in engineering, you went straight to nuclear engineer. You were doing nuclear project at the time. How any more theoretical can you get than that? What happened there?
I was a romantic. One aspect of being an engineer, you've got to have a little bit of romance in your soul. And at the time, in the late 1970s, nuclear fusion was going to change the world. It was going to solve man's energy problem. And the technology and the science of it was just awe-inspiring. And so I joined the UK Atomic Energy Authority, and I went to work for the UK's Fusion Research Laboratory at Cullinan Laboratory. And I worked there, and I worked at MIT. And I designed a very small piece of the Joint European Tokamak, and it was just the most exciting, most brilliant thing possible. The problem was that after a few years, it became clear that it was going to be 30 years before anything actually happened, and I just didn't have the patience for it. So I changed role.
So here we go. The engineer is a problem solver and a bit impatient. So where did these impatient took you? What happened next?
I had a great opportunity, which was to work for Europe's leading a contract research and development centre, which was just outside Cambridge, where I'd been studying. It was called PA Technology. And its job was to take the most advanced technologies, which most companies didn't have access to, and on a contract, develop brand new products for old-fashioned companies to help them undergo a digital transformation. It was the 1980s. It was the time of the microprocessor revolution and a series of other things. And this company was superbly intellectually arrogant. They only recruited people with first-class degrees, and normally from Cambridge. And especially people who had experience. I was the first, and I'm not sure, might actually be the only fresh graduate that they ever recruited. And it was great because they would hand you a 6-month project. You'd get involved in it, and then you'd get to lead it, perhaps. And part of their metric was you shouldn't know anything about the subject matter because that would impede your creativity. So I had the most wonderful selection. I worked on the most wonderful selection of projects. I wrote the software for a machine that made Cadbury's flakes 10 times faster than they'd ever been made before. I wrote the control systems for the world's first writable CD-ROM writer. I spent I spent some time on North Sea oil rig trying to find out why divers occasionally exploded. And I worked on an electronic cat flap, which was the single most difficult and awful project of my life. And then, because I didn't know anything about it at all, I got pulled into a project to design a digital wireless telephone, the world's first digital wireless telephone. Nobody had ever heard of such a thing before.
And was it by then that you decided when it was time to go to Italy and enjoy a new challenge for a challenging company at the time?
So when I ended up running this project, which is now in the Science Museum, by the way. If you go and look for the Ferranti Zone phone, you'll find it in a dusty cabinet in a corner. But it was the world's first digital cordless phone. And once we'd done this, I was a world expert in this. And I wanted to do something with this expertise. I wanted to change things. And it was clear to me that Olivetti, which was it was the world's second largest producer of personal computers at the time. It was a gigantic information technology company characterized by the ability to translate sideways technologically in order to meet business needs, that they had to get into mobile communications next, but they didn't know how to. So I actually wrote to their head of research and development, a Cambridge legend called Hermann Hauser, and I said, I think Olivetti needs to get into mobile, and I'm one of the few people in Europe who can do this. And he called me up and said, you won't believe this, but just recently the board of Olivetti told me to recruit somebody who could work on this. But the only thing is they have to come and work in the headquarters of Olivetti in a town called Ivrea, which is in the Alps. Well, I had just studied Italian A-level for pleasure, and I love mountains. So to me, the idea of coming and working in the last town of the plains before the Valle d'Aosta, to help move the supertanker that was which a company, Olivetti in those days was like Hewlett Packard. It was a real colossus worldwide. To help shift that around to mobile, that was an intoxicating idea. So I went out to Italy, and I spent 8 years there, and it was absolutely wonderful because it was an extraordinary organization filled with talent. The Italian engineers are extraordinarily capable and well trained. Their ability to innovate and to improvise solutions to hard problems was awesome, and I had a tremendous freedom, and we accomplished incredible things in those years.
And was telecommunication one of those specific flavors that they liked you? Because we know you as one of the founders of many companies that have got roots in communication and communication services. Was that love at first sight, or was it just happens to be there for your creativity?
It was love at first sight. Before I went to Olivetti, and before I kind of cast my lot away from cat flaps and chocolate machines into telecoms, I went to Telecom 1987, which was the 4-yearly jamboree of the telecoms industry that took place in those days every year in Geneva. And I went there and spent a few days, and I fell in love with this industry. It was fantastic. It was so exciting, and it was on the verge of the mobile communications revolution. I had the great privilege to be entering an industry just at the moment when it was going through a period of tremendous growth and transformation. The mobile communications revolution was so exciting. It was technologically very demanding. It was hugely lucrative. It was changing society. I remember sitting stark naked in a sauna with Nokia somewhere in rural Finland in 1989. Sharing a beer with a very senior executive of BT, Bernard Mallender, and we were speculating about what the world might look like if half the people could walk around with telephones in their pockets, which could make and receive telephone calls. A magic dream. Well, 20 years later, it had happened. It was incredible. It was very exciting. And in Olivetti, I was responsible for bringing in Olivetti's first range of mobile telephones, the OCT range in 1990, in time for Italian Avanta. We created Europe's first on-premises wireless networks based on the DECT standard. I actually chaired a number of the committees that designed the DECT standard, which was published in 1992 and is still being maintained today. It's considered one of the world's most successful standards. And I actually wrote the technical chapters of the bid that won Olivetti the first private GSM cellular license in Italy in April 1994.
And we'll remember that now. I mean, Olivetti might have been probably not a name that you remember for IT and PC, but he's still now the father, if you want, the mother figure of Vodafone Italia, as it's called now, and through Omnitel, Pronto Italia, Omnitel, and then even it still is somehow the owner of Telecom Italia as it is. So intrinsically, Italian telecoms converged around Olivetti. But time were probably ripe for something else. You moved out of Italy, and what took you? What took you to leave Ivrea, the Alps, the Italian food? I don't know what kept you there, but somehow you end up somewhere else.
So even at 90, my father was saying, I'm well because I'm learning, and I just felt the need to continue to learn new things. One of the things that hadn't gone all so well with our wireless premises network was the marketing wasn't quite right, and I really didn't know anything about marketing, and I wanted to learn about it. At the same time, in 1996, Olivetti was collapsing and it was dying quickly, and I didn't want to bring my family up. I didn't want to bring my young children up in a very small provincial Italian town with centered around a collapsing business. And at that time, fortuitously, I got headhunted to be the global marketing director, of a value-added distributor of internet technology quoted on the London Stock Exchange. There was nothing in that sentence that I knew anything about at all. And here I was being offered a London Stock Exchange quoted company director's salary to learn about marketing and channels. An unbelievable opportunity. And it turned out to be fantastic. By a year later, I was giving the keynote speech on channel strategy to Eurochannel's 97. It didn't last too long because, unfortunately, this company, as well as being a tremendously successful and powerful organization, it was Cisco's largest distributor in Europe. Unfortunately, was also the victim of a gigantic fraud, and very nearly went bankrupt the year later. I stayed with it through the bankruptcy and helped with the rescue, but then I left. And I left to join a telecoms company, a real telecoms company.
Here we go. There's more telecoms, but not the infrastructure side of this time. You were on the service side. Was it true?
It was very fortuitous because it was a company that had been founded by an old university friend of mine who I'd known at that point for 25 years, Paul Maguire, and he had built a business that managed voice messaging infrastructure for large companies. And this was the first. I joined as sales and marketing director. It was the first time that I'd ever worked in it. I'd actually ever worked in a telecoms company. It was fantastic. You could have. Everybody in the entire company could have fallen asleep for a year, and all the invoices would still have been issued and paid. When you come from a manufacturing business, which I had done with Premises Network, you have to continuously work and fight with the manufacturing, with the lots and the batches and selling new product and suddenly you've got recurring revenue business models. It was a revelation. I thought, why would anyone work for a living when you could do this? And so we were doing voice messaging. Voice messaging had been exciting. It was kind of not as exciting anymore, and it started to get less exciting. It was a technology with a glorious future behind. In mid 1999, we had to answer a bid to provide voice messaging services together with SMS, and I had to source. I knew about SMS because I designed networks. I designed the Omnitel network with SMS, but we had to find technology for getting SMS distributed in large quantities to people. And when I looked into it, it became clear that SMS was going to be the next huge thing, enabling enterprises to talk to consumers, and nobody was doing it. And I thought, this is a world changing. This is an opportunity to change the world. Well, I was a bit uncertain. Paul encouraged me, but I was a bit uncertain. I went to Telecom 99, the last of the great telecom jamborees. It was the telecom shows, unfortunately, were one of the victims of the great internet and telecoms crash of the early noughties. But it was fascinating. Telecom 99 was full of people, large amounts of capital going to WAP. The great thing about being at that point nearly 40 was that you acquire a certain experience, and you picked up a WAP phone at Telecom 99. Maybe you even remember, Dario. You play with it for 90 seconds. It was obviously going to fail. It was obviously rubbish. And yet that's where all the smart capital was going. And if all the smart capital was off chasing butterflies, SMS was something one could do with very little resources. So I did that. I founded the business that became M-Blocks. And within a year, we'd done £1 million worth of turnover with no capital.
And mBlocks today still lives on in a different form as well. It's still one of the largest communication service providers, you would call them now. But at the time, it wasn't just the SMS part. It was the direct carrier billing. You were one of the largest direct carrier billing aggregators in the world.
That's correct. We started off doing enterprise communications, a business which was sold in 2000. mBlocks was sold in 2016 to Cinch, and I'm very happy that it went to a good home. But in the course of doing SMS, the mobile operators had found that the only secure API that they had for doing billing was their SMS interface, because they could fiddle with the SMSCs to do special billing. So they wanted to get into payments, but they needed a secure API. And hey presto, they found that the SMS interface was. So anyone who was in SMS aggregating suddenly found themselves dragged into carrier billing. I was a bit skeptical about it, but if we were going to do it, we're going to do it well. And by 2007, mBlocks was the largest processor of direct carrier of premium SMS and carrier billing payments in the world. We cleared and settled about $500 million a year, and it was a good business. Our margins were good, our revenues were high, our market share was enormous, our fraud rates were very low. We were very respectable. I was co-opted onto the board of ICSTIS, now known as PhonePay Plus, the regulator. And Dario, people ask me my opinion about things a lot, which was fine, because then in 2008 we got hit by a gigantic scam, premium SMS scam. Millions of people in Britain had money stolen from them by messages, most of which transited through the mBlocks network. So of course, who is it? It's Mr. Pleased with himself who ends up on television. Mr. Bud, the role of you and mBlocks in this scandal, were you complicit or just recklessly incompetent? 12 years ago, and I still haven't forgotten that. So we had to clean it up. PhonePay Plus, I had to resign from the board. PhonePay Plus did an extra special investigation of us and concluded that ultimately our behaviour had been exemplary. But that was quite an unpleasant experience.
And it was a learning. Did it let you to think differently in the market?
Very much so. Taught me a really serious lesson. It taught me that it's not enough to feel good about yourself and to think about risk. You actually have to do something about them. That question was a good question. It also taught me that when things go bad, they don't go bad slowly. They go bad very quickly. And it taught me that if you can think of a way that somebody can game you to make money, then they will do so. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So 2 years later, along came WAP billing, web-based billing, and app-based billing. And it was quite clear to me that the same kind of crash would happen again. And the question was, how could we stop it? I really didn't want to go on television and have to answer that question again. So we commissioned Consult Hyperion, David Birch's business, to figure out the answer. And the answer was, you can't. This is going to happen again. That was not an okay answer for me. So I spent 2011 thinking very hard about how to stop it, and I ended up inventing iProof, the technology that underlies iProof. It was far too late for mBlocks. In fact, mBlocks, as a board in mBlocks, we decided to sell the entire carrier billing business in 2012, which we did. It was good timing because in 2013, all the US providers of direct carrier billing and premium SMS got fined $1 billion for fraudulent billing. So that was the right choice. But having solved a problem which was really about authenticated consent, I realized that actually what I'd done was to invent a solution to a much bigger problem, which was the establishment of trust over the internet. One of the challenges when you're an entrepreneur, Dario, is that you've got to find a problem which is big enough and enduringly interesting enough to be worth you spending 10 years of your life on. You're going to be with this for 10 years, and you're going to have to get out of bed every day, and it had better stay interesting. SMS was like that. SMS was fascinating in 2000, and the guys at Cinch are now making even more money and solving even more problems 20 years later. Identity and biometric authentication is like that. And next year it'll be 10 years since I started thinking about this problem, and it remains absolutely every bit as even more relevant than it was 10 years ago, and every bit as fascinating. It's enabled me to be an engineer. I mean, some of the early algorithms in iProof I actually designed myself.
Yeah. And tell us, so what's your passion and creativity now in iProve developing? So what is the answer? Have you found the answer for what is the problem of identification or authorization?
So the big idea behind iProve was something we call the flash mark, was the idea of using the screen of the user's device to illuminate their face with a sequence of colors. The sequence is determined by the server, not on the device, so it can't be predicted. And then you feed video of their face back to our servers, where we look at the way that the light from the screen reflects off their face. The way it reflects tells us whether we're looking at a human face-shaped, live, skin-covered 3D object. And the sequence of colors, which was not predictable on the device, has to be correct. If the light that is reflecting off the user's face is reflecting the right colors, you know the person is genuinely present here now. But if the color sequence is missing altogether or the wrong sequence, you know you're looking at a deep fake or a recording. It's a very simple idea, but it's very powerful, and it's the only technology in the world that has yet been found to be really effective against deepfakes. And it's, we spent 10 years making this thing work in practice, which is actually very, very difficult, but it works on a huge scale now. Millions and millions of people have iProved in the last year. But it doesn't stop. The thing that makes this great is that we're in an arms race. The smart guys are getting smarter. We're up against people with, enormously more resources and capability and brains than we have. So we just have to keep moving. We have to keep innovating in order to stay ahead of the bad guys. So it's a permanently refreshing set of problems. We keep developing and launching new technologies, new solutions. We recently launched a technology called flexible authentication, which enables banks and governments to choose the balance between ceremony and security in every transaction that they do, using different methods of fraud detection. So it remains absolutely fascinating. It's one reason why we're able to recruit extremely bright people to iProve, just because the combination of a wonderful mission and some really interesting problems and rapid growth is just an intoxicating mix for entrepreneurial people.
So are you still fundamentally a romantic engineer, just that your romance and passion is taking you to identity and confirming that people in the digital world are really they are? Is that still the same you that you had when you first started doing completely different things, or have you changed fundamentally?
Oh, no, 100%. 100%. I think you have to be driven both by the fundamental technical interest of the problems that you're solving. I mean, the problems we're solving now are still today really, really hard and interesting. And as I say, I occasionally get involved in them. I designed some of the early protocols. The guys who know better than me are busily designing them out and have more or less succeeded. But they're interesting problems. But there has to be a degree of romance in there. There has to be some sort of enlightenment value, which is met and satisfied by the mission of a business. I think a business thrives if it has a sense of overarching mission, that you're doing something fundamentally great. In the 1980s, we were transforming industries from mechanical technology to electronic and to microprocessor technology. It was a technological revolution. In the 1990s, we were mobilizing the masses. I mean, we were literally changing the way that people communicated with each other. And in fact, that's of course exactly what happened. When I was doing SMS, when we were doing SMS, that was a fundamental change in the way that organizations interacted with consumers. It wasn't just another technological change. I mean, the shift from call centers to text messaging was a profound change in the texture of relationships between consumers. What we're doing now, there is no more profound question. There is no more profound challenge that confronts society now than the question of identity, unless it's climate change. And I have to say, over the years, I have actually continued my interest in energy. In the late noughties, I chaired the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Consortium on digital energy, which was looking at the way that digital technology could affect the energy grid. And for 10 years, I had the privilege of chairing a company called Passive Systems, which is a world leader in the management of, in the development of technology, in the delivery of services to turn domestic hybrid boilers into distributed demand management systems in highly renewable rich grids. So climate change is and energy is a particular passion of mine.
So perfect time then to ask you, given your creativity and your passion, is what's the next 10, 20-year project you'd like to do now? What would you like to put your teeth into it? Is it climate change? Is it more identity? What would you choose now?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, frankly, there is so much identity, and cybersecurity is such a vast and ever-changing topic, field, that actually there are challenges to address that will keep me going. I mean, my father was still working until he was 95, and that's, you know, how boring would it be not to? Climate change is going to be I still am fascinated by the technology, both of nuclear fusion, and I have a relationship with a company in Vancouver that is developing nuclear fusion in a garage, but also renewable energy, grid management. These are fascinating world-changing areas, but at the same time, one of the great things, you don't know what's going to come next. You know, if you'd asked me in 2007, what's your next gig going to be? I don't know. You know it and you see it. Providing that one is open to learning and discovering new things, and you have a sufficient. I mean, I think one of the key attributes of a good entrepreneur is denial. You know, providing that you don't look down, and you have insufficient imagination to think of all the things that can go wrong, then then you inevitably have an unquenchable appetite for throwing yourself into new things, providing they're big enough and interesting enough. What you just asked me is, what's going to be big enough and interesting enough over the next 30 years? Who knows? But I hope I'll be there when it happens.
Well, definitely, though, the quality of ingenuity and creativity, a bit of passion, seems to be equally applied to anything that comes next. So if we scratch the surface, we'll find more of those in Andrew for sure. And I'm talking of somebody that has had the pleasure of working with him. So it's not just an engineer, but it's a very special kind of engineer. So Andrew, congratulations on your recent fellowship, and Andrew Bud CBE and fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineers. Thanks for being here, for telling us a bit more about your past. And I'm sure we'll meet again to discuss more of the future.
Thank you very much, Dario. And thank you for sustaining the will to live through my perorations.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.